Hello, my name's Chris from the Mad Batter channel. Welcome to another video. In this video I'm going to take you through the automatic masks of Lightroom Classic, those which are powered by AI. I'm just going to show you each of the masks and what they do, and then in subsequent videos we'll get into the more interesting stuff, such as how to improve automatic masks and how to combine masks in various ways. There are in fact 8 automatic masks, 4 which I call fully automatic, i.e. the user has no input at all. These are sky, subject, background and people. The semi-automatic masks are those where the user does have input and then AI does its thing. That is object, colour range and luminance range. The 4th is the depth range, but we won't be looking at that as it only applies to certain images with built-in depth information, such as some photos taken on an iPhone. So here we are in Lightroom Classic, and we'll start with this image. Now, none of these automatic masks have a direct keyboard shortcut like the brush, linear and radial gradients. So we first need to get into masking directly by pressing Shift and W. So here you can see the masks, and the 3 main automatic masks, fully automatic masks are here: subject, sky and background. People's down here, but you'll see it said no people detected. So we'll start with subject. So if you just click on subject, it'll detect what it thinks is the subject. And here we are. In fact, it's picked out the 2 main objects which feature principally in the image. All we want is the dog. So we could try using the object mask, but in reality the simplest way to get what we want would be simply to subtract, and we could use various things. That we'll choose a brush, make it a bit bigger, sure, density and flow to 100, and then my computer's being a bit slow today for some reason. Anyway, I'll brush out that bit of the mask that we don't want, and there's the subject mask that we want. So now we've gone back to the original subject mask, and you'll see not only has it picked out the dog and this log, but a bit of sand here and a shell here. Now let's go and create a new mask, and this time we'll choose background. So there's our background mask, which has selected everything except the 2 things that Lightroom thinks are the subject. But you'll notice the shell has not been selected like it was in the subject mask and a bit of sand here. This demonstrates that in fact the background mask is simply the inverted subject mask. So you could easily, if you didn't want to have to do both, you could take this background mask, click on the 3 dots and duplicate and invert, and here we see mask to inverted, which is identical to the subject mask. So we've got the shell selected and a bit of sand here. So that explains the background and the subject masks. The 3rd masking function is the sky mask, or as I prefer to call it, the sky selection. So we've got this image here. If we go direct into masking with the usual Shift and W, now there's not much to say really. A sky mask button here. If Lightroom doesn't detect a sky, then it won't be active. Otherwise you just click it and sky will do its thing. And there we are. You can see the sky has been selected. Now if we zoom in a bit, you can see there's some funky stuff going on around the horizon, and it's also got bits of this roof here. I won't go into this anymore at the moment. In the next couple of videos I'll give you some tips on how to improve the quality of a sky mask. But that's all there is to it really. So now I can go in and make whatever adjustments I want. We think we need to reduce some of these highlights, reduce the colour temperature a bit, and a bit of dehaze. And there we are, we've got a much different sky. So that's without any adjustments, and that with. I think you'll agree it makes for a much better image. So here's a handy little trick for you with the sky mask. Say you wanted to adjust these areas here, which are a reflection of the sky in the water. There are various ways to do it, but one little trick is if you rotate the image 180 degrees, you can sometimes fool the sky mask into thinking that this is actually sky, presumably because it's at the top of the picture, which just shows that the AI isn't quite as intelligent as you might think. Anyway, so we'll hit Shift and W, create a new mask, and we'll have select sky and see what happens. And there you are, you see it's selected the water. There's a bit of an overlap here, but I won't worry too much about that for the moment. So of course we can now go in and match a bit to what we did to the actual sky, so the reflections look a little bit more realistic. And there we are, so that's before the second sky mask and that's after. So we can go back into the library module and then rotate the image back to its correct orientation, and here we are, I've got an adjustment in the sky and the lake. So that's before and that's after. So a little tip worth bearing in mind. The final fully automated masking function is the people mask. Every time you enter masking, Lightroom Classic will automatically try and detect any people in the image. So if we take this image, go direct to masking by pressing Shift and W, you'll see there under people it's saying detecting people, and there it's found a person. So if you click on it, it then starts trying to find features, and you'll see there are 9 potential parts of the person it will identify. So it's facial skin, body skin, eyebrows, eye sclera, that's the whites of the eyes, iris and pupil, lips, hair, facial hair and clothes. And you'll see it does a pretty accurate job on all these, although admittedly this is a fairly simple case with only one person. And then if you want to create a mask, you can choose whether to have the entire person or have one or any more of these individual parts. So in this case I'll just go for the clothes, and then you go click create mask, and there's the mask. So now we can do something like add a colour overlay. What colour should we give him? Orange maybe. There we are, we've converted his clothes from white to a sort of orange colour, and his shoes of course. So that's the basic idea behind people masking. So let's try something a little more difficult. We've got this image here with 4 people in, so Shift and W to take us into masking. You'll see it's detecting people, and it's found all people when it masks all 4. It's missed a little bit on the shoe here, and then it's found all the individual people. And let's say we'll take this person, it's detecting their features, and again does an incredibly remarkable job. So as you can see, it works even on more complicated images of people as well. As ever, nothing's ever perfect with auto masking, but you can tidy up a mask with the brush tool if you need to. So that's all I need to say about people masking. We now turn to what I call the semi-automatic masks, those where the user has initial input before the AI does its calculations. These are the object mask and the 2 range masks, colour and luminance. Let's start with the object mask. So we'll go back to this image where, if you recall, when we applied a subject mask, it masked both the dog and the post. Let's say we just want to mask the dog. So we'll go Shift and W to go into masking, create new mask, and choose an object mask. you'll now see that we have two options here. One is the brush selection where we paint over what we want to mask, and the other is the rectangle where you draw a rectangle about an object. So we'll start with the rectangle. We draw around like that. The AI will now attempt to identify the objects we drew around. And you can see it's done a pretty good job. You'll see that the AI didn't pick up the shadow, but we can easily deal with that if we click on Add and another object mask. This time we'll use the brush select. You'll see we have a slider here to change the size of the brush. That looks about right. And what we need to do is paint over this dark area. Let go. And it's done a pretty good job. It's also picked up this little bit here, which we could try and remove with the brush using a subtract mask. But for current purposes, this will do fine. And now we can, for instance, let's say warm up and take down the highlights, increase exposure a bit. That's obviously over the top, but you'll see that we've been able to isolate the dog and its shadow and apply an over-the-top effect to it. So that's object masking. So now we can turn to the two range masks, which operate in much the same way, but using colour or luminance values depending on which one you choose. So if we go back to this image, this is one you recall where we gave a slight tint to the clothing using a person mask. Now let's say we wanted to make the green much more vibrant. The best way, it would be a nightmare to try and select this with a brush or a radial gradient. The best way is to rely on colour values. So we create new mask, go down to colour range. So what this does, it gives you an eyedropper. If you click once, it'll select the colour directly onto the eyedropper. And you see we've got a fair bit of the green, but not all of it. So I'll undo that and select colour range again. Now instead of just clicking on one of these greens, if you click and drag over a range of greens, you'll get much more of the green colour. So if we do that and let go, you see we've got probably all the greens that we want. You can then refine it using this refine slider. That will select more and that will select less. If we do that, we're probably not selecting the man anymore. So that looks a reasonable selection. All the greens. There's a bit missed here. So you can add to your selection by pressing the shift key, so you get a little plus. Click on that colour there. So I think now we've got most of the greens. You can remove by holding the alter the option key and click. That in theory at least removes that colour there. So now having done that, let's say take the tint towards the green, reduce the temperature, increase the saturation, and you see we've converted yellowy greens to vibrant greens. And that's a pretty complex selection and achieved very easily using this colour range mask. We could try and reduce. Much if I go this way and collect more, it's probably a bit better. There we are, washed out, vibrant green. So that's the colour range mask. We'll now look at the luminance range mask, which works in pretty much a similar way. There are two ways to make a mask which can then be refined. So we'll work on this image. Now obviously could say try a sky mask or a sky mask and invert it if we wanted to collect the dark parts. But luminance range gives you an alternative way. So if we click on range, then luminance range, you'll notice by the way it says no people found. And this brings up the luminance range mask. Now the first way to select is using the eyedropper tool, and again as with the colour range, if you just simply click, it'll select all the areas of similar luminance. On the other hand, if you click and drag, it'll collect all the areas of luminance covered by the selection you make. So if we draw a little box like that, it'll select far more of the sky, and of course it goes into the dark parts of the foreground as well. But you'll notice when you do make a selection with the eyedropper tool, this luminance range bar changes. So on the right hand side here are the darks going all the way up to the whites. The area within this box is wholly selected, and you can move it around. As you see, if you move it this way, you're selecting the dark. Move it further that way, you're selecting only the lights. And then these areas here, what effectively are feathers, where you can cause the selection to fade away. So in this case, we want all the brights, so we'll move it right up there, and then we can select more of the brights, and then we can feather it a bit until we've got the sort of selection we want. So there we have it. Now we can say take down the highlights, possibly cool the sky off a little bit. So that's before and that's after. Before, after. So that's one way to use a luminance range mask. The other way is to go direct to the luminance range slider here, and I'll show you that in the next image. Another good use of the luminance range mask is to target the very brightest or darkest areas where they're distributed throughout the image in a complicated way. If, for instance, you had a bright sky, that's easy to target with either a sky mask or a linear gradient. But say trying to pick out all these very bright areas in this image would be very complicated to do in a manual way. So we'll hit Shift and W to go into masking, and we'll choose a luminance range mask. Now, instead of using the eyedropper, what we're going to do is use this slider. So we don't want to target the dark areas. I'm going after the highlights in this image. So we'll move this all the way up here, and then we can then feather the selection to get the precise bits we want. I didn't show you this last time, but if you click this show luminance map, that makes the image grayscale, apart from the areas which are selected, which are shown in red, which perhaps makes it easier to see what you've got selected. Probably need to just feather it a bit more and maybe come down. That looks about right, so turn that off. And now we'll reduce the highlights all the way down. So you can see that has effectively recovered the very bright areas. Look at the apple here or here, and this bamboo stick here. Before, very bright, over bright, and now recovered those very bright highlights. So as you can see, you can approach the luminance range mask either by using the eyedropper or by using these sliders here. So that is our quick trip through the automatic masks in Lightroom Classic. Of course, we've only touched upon what can be done with these powerful mask options. In the next video, I will explain the basic principles of combining masks to enable you to produce even more complex masking results. After that, I'll be giving some tips and tricks on how to get the absolute best out of the masking functions in Lightroom Classic. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you do, perhaps you could give it a like and maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. In the meantime, many thanks for watching.